Wisconsin Women in Conservation, a project of Michael Field's Agricultural Institute in partnership with Renewing the Countryside, Marbleseed, and Wisconsin Farmers Union, is privileged to celebrate Native American Heritage Month by exploring the past, present, and future of Ho-Chunk agriculture with Hinu Helgesen Smith, the Executive Director of the Ho-Chunk Department of Agriculture. Smith is a former Ho-Chunk legislator with a professional background in community health and diabetes prevention in the Ho-Chunk Nation's high-risk population. Her guiding principle is forwarding initiatives that improve tribal health outcomes while protecting the environment. Her current efforts at the Department of Agriculture focus on reviving Ho-Chunk traditional agriculture and foodways with the goal of offering tribal members free, fresh, local, healthy, regeneratively grown, and culturally relevant food. The department currently grows and distributes food from two farms, one in Baraboo and one in Toma, through tribal elder food boxes. They are also partnering with researchers to grow out indigenous seed varieties.
So today we have the honor and joy of getting to hear from Hinu Smith, the Executive Director of the Ho-Chunk Nation's Department of Agriculture, and are just so excited to hear what she has to say. While we're waiting and some other folks are still joining, would love if everybody could put your name in the chat, where you're calling in from today, and something that you've learned from an elder that is still important to you today. So thank you, Hinu, for all the work you do and for being here today to share more. And with that, I will have you, if you're able to just share your slides, and we'll hand the floor over to you.
Thank you. I'm really excited for this. Kind of have a little tickle in my throat, so please bear with me. All right, is this visible to everybody, and can everybody hear me?
Yes, if you want to just put it in. Oh, perfect. You're good to go.
So I'm going to get back to this picture of the corn here shortly, but I want you to notice that, at least for now, that is blue and white. So the Ho-Chunk people, we call ourselves Ho-Chungra, and that's talking about the sacred voice. We view our language as very sacred. And so we call ourselves Ho-Chungra. People, other people, and we ourselves formerly called ourselves, when we were created as a federally recognized tribe, we were known as the Winnebago people. And we use that, but that wasn't our name for ourselves, and that wasn't a word that's actually a Ho-Chunk word. So if you look in like old history information, you might see us being referred to as Winnebago or Winnebago business people. That is us, but we've taken back our name and reclaimed the use of our traditional name for ourselves, and that's the Ho-Chungra. Our origin tells us, we have origin stories, we have oral history, and our oral history tells us that we have been here since the beginning of time. You know, so somebody might say 4,000 years, 10,000 years, 12,000 years, 20,000 years. We say we have always been here, and our origin stories tell us that. Our origin stories, our oral history tells us we were originated in Mogashuch, and that translates to the Red Banks. And the Red Banks are physically located near Green Bay. So other tribes, their origin stories, you know, they talk about that maybe they followed a prophecy and came to this area. Maybe, you know, they were relocated here by the federal government, but our history, and, you know, I kind of am a little uncomfortable with saying, and Western history also validates this, because we don't feel that we need to be validated. We feel that we have science inherently, fundamentally built into our language and our oral history. So we know that we've been here. Our science, our history tells us that we've always been here. But, you know, I guess for practical purposes, that is also validated by other teachings and Western teachings to some degree. So with that, our traditional territory spanned Wisconsin, what is today called Wisconsin, Minnesota, most of Illinois, all the way down to St. Louis, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Iowa. Some research, Western research might say, Wisconsin, Illinois, parts of Minnesota and Iowa. But we know that our oral history puts us out to North Dakota, South Dakota, and even into Canada. And so we defer to our traditions, our oral history, our elders, the stories that our elders told us. And I was even on the phone with an elder this morning about some other things, and we ended up talking about, some of this stuff as well. We know our oral history tells us that a lot of other tribes came from us. And other tribes, their oral history will tell them as well that they came from us. So we're the Ho-Chungra, but also the Missouri tribe, Iowa, Oto, Omaha, Osage, Ponca, Kansas, Quapaw, Mandan, Hidatsa tribal people came from us. We even say the Lakota, Dakota, the Siouan tribes came from us as well. Now, they may say we came from them, but we say they came from us. Nonetheless, there's that intersection of a shared history and a shared origin. The Ho-Chunk people were a very tough tribe, a very big tribe, a fierce tribe, and we were feared by other tribes and by colonists when they came here as well. But with that, we were also very respected and regarded by our neighbors. We had many alliances with other tribes, and over time, some of the alliances changed. Maybe we ended up, I don't want to say became enemies, but there may have been challenges there as well. We know that we traveled westward. I mean, we traveled everywhere, but one of our main travel areas, our main road, our highway, one of our highways was the Mississippi River. And if you look up and down the Mississippi River, those tribes that are located there are indicators of tribes that came from us, right? These tribes that I had already mentioned, and we call them our little brothers and sisters. And sometimes when they're talking to us, they know in their oral history they came from us, and they might call us the big brother or big sister tribe. Some of them even talk about, their oral history paints a picture for them, and they'll talk about the topography of this area. Even if you look down by La Crosse, there's very prominent formations there along the river, and their stories talk about those. And so when they traveled back here recently and were really in awe because those stories that they had always heard were there in front of them, they were able to see that. So we do have a shared history, and we rely heavily on our oral history. There's a couple of maps in here. I'm not going to go too much into them, but I just want to display that. So if you can see my cursor down here is Nishoch. This is what today is called the Missouri. You can see the Mississippi in here. You can see where kind of Wisconsin forms. But that's part of our territory. Some other stories say this is, part of our territory. These are some areas that we were forcibly removed to. These are all, we had words for all of this, all of these waterways. We were traveling these waterways and had words for them. So when we talk about our language, it's really important that when we're understanding our language and talking, that it holds much more than just day-to-day conversations. It holds within it, it's embedded with our history, our lessons, our sciences. We have words for alligator and dinosaur, which is Not to say that we couldn't invent those words today. We can. We do have words for television, for computer. But we know that we had ancient words for alligator, and that's before modern day travel. So our oral history tells us what our territory, our traditional territory was, but it also tells us that we had trade routes down into Mexico, down into Florida. And so by virtue of that, we had these words for alligator, wakiti hujo, talks, because the way they look, it looks like a bug, like an ugly bug with 4 legs. So wakiti hujo is our old word for alligator. And that's a word that was developed through our trade routes. There is a word for dinosaur, an ancient word for dinosaur. I don't have that. I don't know what it is, but it kind of refers to the water. So I don't have the story for that for you, but the point being that when we use our language, it's embedded with a lot of information. So I just want to talk a little bit about our agriculture, since I am the executive director of the Department of Agriculture for the Ho-Chunk Nation. So what did our agriculture look like pre-colonial contact? We planted, we had gardens, we had expansive gardens. By some accounts, they could be, as big as 2 miles wide and 6 or 8 miles long, or so many arrow shots in each direction. Again, these are oral histories that have been passed down to generations of us. Our people foraged, hunted, trapped, tapped trees, and did wild ricing. So in that, I just have a really brief list of food that included. Culturally significant food, corn, what's known in mainstream as Indian corn or decorative corn. To us, we call that, wichawas is one of the words that we use for corn. And it's very, very significant. We use it, on a daily, day-to-day basis. We use it in ceremonies. And it's really not only culturally significant, but families will gather around corn to care for the corn, to plant it, harvest it, care for it, preserve it. Beans, we had Ho-Chunk variety. Well, back to the corn. Our history tells us that we've had, at least, 15 different varieties of corn. And I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. But we had Ho-Chunk varieties of squash, beans, probably melons, and just a variety of other produce. We would hunt, trap muskrat. We would consume muskrat, beaver, rabbits, fish. The old timers really enjoyed fish head soup, birds, and buffalo. Buffalo was historically here in this location, but also historically we would go out and seek buffalo and even move across, the Mississippi River and go westward and go hunting. We knew how to preserve foods. We knew how to dry foods, smoke foods, store them. We knew how to, grind plants to make them usable. We knew how to take plants that might be poisonous, at certain times or just not very palatable at certain times. We knew how to make them palatable. We knew how, when to harvest so that they were healthy for us. We knew how to use certain plants to address certain ailments or conditions. And that was all through, tribal ecological knowledge, shared family history, and at that time, our doctors were the, shamans were the doctors, every family, I mean, you just, by virtue of knowing the plants and the landscape, knew how to doctor people using these plants. But we also knew how to manipulate plants into bags, into mats, into baskets, into storage containers, clothing, any number of things. We used to follow the seasons to a degree. Some of our history will say we were not nomadic, but we would follow the seasons, if that makes sense. So we weren't nomads just wandering around, Turtle Island, but we did know how to move with the seasons or following, the paths of, migratory paths of the animals, etc. Primary transportation was, on foot or using canoes that were, built out of trees. We had dogs and we knew how to train dogs, work with dogs. They were part of the family and using dogs to transport items. We also had raised beds. We knew how to plant according to the sun, according to the seasons. We knew how to manipulate the ground and the earth to grow our food. And I would say we were, the original horticulturalists, agronomists, scientists. We have been selectively breeding our corn, forever. So as I was saying before, we had, at least 15 varieties of wheat hawas that could grow in any condition. So we had selectively bred our corn so that it could grow in rich soil, sandy soil, clay. It could grow up in the ashland area where it might be colder or have a shorter growing season. We knew how to do this, and we had not only corn, but our other seeds that we knew how to adapt to the different climates and different conditions. We utilized traditional land management practices in general, but also for our growing. We knew that if we utilized fire, the remnants of fire, that could amend our soil to help us in the next growing season. We understood how to do not only raised beds, but also, raised rows. And that could help us amend the soil. If we're burning, at the end of the season, burning off the residue, then that ash would then, seep down when the bed is raised, it would kind of seep down into the trenches, I guess you might say. And then we knew how to amend that for the next season and move our growing over so that our new seeds and new plants would be able to utilize that new nutrient that has been intentionally placed into the ground. We knew how to rotate crops. We knew how to interplant. The common term, we hear is three sisters, the corns, beans, and squash. But all the different tribes had their own sisters. Maybe one tribe has 4 sisters, maybe another tribe has 7 sisters. Each tribe had their own formula for these plantings. And maybe there wasn't just one, maybe there were multiple types of that. So today, in modern agriculture, we hear things about companion planting, intercropping, things like that. But that is that traditional ecological knowledge. That is what tribal people had for thousands of years. We knew how to do that. So we have the corns, the beans, the squash, the sunflowers, the tobacco, the other seeds that we used. So I don't know exactly, if Ho-Chunk said, oh, we had 5 sisters or 6, but I guess my point is when we hear the term 3 sisters, there could be many sisters, and it's indicative to each individual tribe. Our food system. So then if we kind of move forward, post-colonial contact, westward expansion, we hear about like the Homestead Act and opening up the Wild West to settlement, blah, 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 and that's kind of always told from the history book side of things, school history, primary, secondary history context. It's always told from mainstream America, and any time that we talk about different times in history, there's always the flip side of that, and how did that impact indigenous people of the lands at that time. So when there was westward expansion, all this free land was up for grabs, right? Well, that actually, resulted in the killing of a lot of tribal people. So then when that was happening, there were different eras in American history. Indian history is American history. So there are different eras in Indian American history. And so things weren't always bad. You know, there were some relationships that were good relationships and symbiotic relationships and reciprocal relationships. So I'm not discounting that, but I want to talk about maybe the things that are a little bit more negative and then how that relates to our Ho-Chunk agriculture. And so post-contact, we experienced attacks on our food system. So there was the extermination era. And that was just like a combination of time and actions that were sanctioned by the federal government against Indian people, Ho-Chunk people, indigenous people. You'll hear me say the term Indian. It's how we are referred to in the Constitution, in treaties, etc. So I'm not recommending everybody use that term, but I use it because that's how we're referred to in some of these formal documents. So during the extermination era, you know, that included, you know, literally killing tribal people, hunting tribal people like vermin on the land. You know, you can even go into old history accounts and see stories that will refer to this. So it was about really exterminating the people, the indigenous people of the land, death, genocide. And during this time, there were warfare tactics that were instituted against us. And when our people still existed through extermination and genocide, then what do? You attack things that they rely on. So there were warfare tactics instituted against our food systems. Our food was pillaged, burned, stolen, and killed. I'm just going to move to this picture. I'm going to jump back after this, but this is kind of an infamous picture that is very indicative. It just fundamentally reflects the attack on Indian people. These are buffalo skulls. Thousands, millions of buffalo were systematically killed to near extinction as a means to kill the Indian person, the savage, the wild savage, the vermin of the land. If they couldn't kill the indigenous people, then they attacked the food. And this was very intentional. And the government paid for each buffalo that was killed. And so our food systems were attacked, right down to near extermination of the buffalo. There were millions of buffalo across North America, down to, by some accounts, 500. Only 500 remain. So the buffalo that exists today, there's a small population that is a genetically pure population, but many of the buffalo that exist today have been crossbred with cattle. Thank goodness there's been efforts to revitalize the buffalo. They are very culturally significant to many tribal people, including the Ho-Chungra. And in our clans, and we know, just a quick look, that we know how important they are to us, because even in our clan system, we have a buffalo clan, for which I'm a member of. I'm a buffalo clan person. We have different clans. So that was really important to us, not just for food, not just for our clanship, but also for clothing, and any number of other things. Shelter, you know, we knew how to take the hide and the brains of animals and tan the hide to become a very supple, pliable, usable piece of leather. We knew how to hunt them, harvest them, preserve them, consume them in various ways, utilize, you know, every aspect of the animal for tools, you know, taking the tenons, you know, and creating bowstrings and turning them into weapons. This was stuff that was taught, that we had, and some of this knowledge still remains today with some of our people, including my brother. He could go out and harvest a deer and end up having, taking parts of the deer and having bowstrings. He would make bowstrings out of them. He knew how to make bows. He could go down out and chop down a specific type of a tree, turn it into bows. He knew how to bend them so that they had the right curvature. He knew how to make glue out of like pine sap, and I don't know what else he was using to do these things. So this information, it's still utilized and passed on today. And then when we move on to, from the extermination era, then we move on to the removal era and reservation era, where the federal government systematically, attacked our people through other means. Since, genocide didn't kill us, then we just need to move the problem. So move the problem out of these lands that we want was the approach that the federal government took. So there were, we know that our people were removed to reservations westward. I think mainstream history will say maybe 9 times. Our oral history will tell us it's at least 12 or 13 times or more, depending on who you're talking to, who of our elders that you're talking to. We're moved into different areas of Minnesota. We were moved to Nebraska, and then there was another state in there too, and I don't recall what it is offhand. But we were removed, and many of our people either hid out here and never left. Some of our people were removed on every tribe had their own trail of tears, right? And so when we were moved, oftentimes we came back. And some of our stories will tell us that we were so swift and precise and agile and understanding of our environment that we would beat the soldiers back. We would be back on foot ahead of the soldiers who were on horse. And so that, that's how attuned we were to the environment, that we knew how to do that. During these removals, our people starved during transportation. Sometimes we were loaded up in cattle cars, sometimes we were marched, sometimes we were placed on very horrendous soil. Sometimes we were moved in winter, so we didn't have time to grow and harvest crops. So it was very horrible. And when you hear people talk about, the largest mass hanging in American history, 38 Lakota people were hanged under Lincoln's watch. Well, that wasn't just the Lakota people, that was also, or Dakota people, there were also Ho-Chunks within that as well. And what happened was, during the reservation era, the removal era, foods were promised. The government was going to provide government rations to the people because they were no longer hunting, thousands or millions of acres of land at their will. They were moved to very small pieces of land. A lot of people on a very enclosed area didn't have the capacity. The wildlife and plant life didn't have the capacity to maintain the population of people. So the government was supposed to be bringing in food, and sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes when it arrived, it was rancid, rotten, unusable. Sometimes it would arrive, but it was never dispersed to the tribal people. In some of those occasions, and particularly with the Dakota 38, people were starving, people were hungry, people wanted to feed their children, the babies, the elders, their families, and went after the food that they were promised, that they were entitled to. And there was this uprising and this war happened, and people were hanged and killed. And that affected our people too. And so what are you supposed to do when you're desperate and you need to feed your children? And so people were just simply trying to exist. But during these removals, during these forced marches and forced cattle car transportation to different reservations, we knew that we had to bring seeds. Our people at times were starving, and yet we knew to bring our seeds with us. But then we were faced with what to do with those seeds. Do you eat them because you're starving and you need to feed your children? Or do you hold on to them so you can plant them in the next season? Can you imagine having the capacity to feed your children and having to hold off on that because you know for the greater good you have to plant those in the spring? It's unfathomable. But our people had to make those choices. There's some family stories talking about taking one kernel of corn and breaking it up to feed a family. The whole family is eating on one piece of corn. How do you do that? And so our people are resilient and persistent. And it just amazes me that our people came through that. When our food stores were attacked, burned, stolen, destroyed, our people would hide the seeds in the hems of their clothing or consuming them, so that they would be able to, swallow them whole so that they can use them later, putting them in their waistband, hiding them on themselves. We knew we had to do that. And somehow, we were able to plant in the spring. And then we move on to the assimilation era. So our foods were attacked, then our foods were used to, control us, withheld from us, they were changed, and then they were used to assimilate us. So when our tribal people were moved to reservations or allotments, the land was systematically divided like a block, right, into grids. And then families were placed on them, and where you were placed on the grid was very intentionally designed to sever families. So, our nuclear family, according to our kinship system, is very big compared to other kinship systems. So the way our kinship system works, we have many mothers, many fathers, many siblings. And so our nuclear family might be what somebody else would call their extended family. But for us, it was a nuclear family. And so we had these very strong family bonds and ties. And so the government would take part of that family located at one end of the reservation and take part of that family and locate it somewhere else, very intentionally to divide the family, and then try to assimilate them to utilize Western agricultural practices, which were kind of foreign, even though we were the original agronomists and agriculturalists and knew how to do that. We weren't allowed to do it in our terms. And so they were, trying to forcibly make us farm in the Western sense of farming. And so our food then during that time was used to assimilate us. And then these government rations were more free flowing, which is today it's called the FDIPR program or Food Distribution Program on Indian reservations. And so they're healthier today, but back in the day, they were horrendous. They were, either really high fat or very high carb, very low nutrient, and they just weren't great foods all the time. But they were used to assimilate us and to get us away from our traditional agricultural practices. And then you move forward to the self-determination era, where tribes then start to take control over their government, their lands, their processes and systems. And so the Ho-Chunk people became a federally recognized tribe in the 60s through congressional action and this process that Congress had set up. So today we actually have 4 districts. Our footprints now, our lands are in Wisconsin, our trust lands are in Wisconsin, then we have some allotment lands in Minnesota, and then we have fee simple lands in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Illinois. And then we're actually governed by our Constitution, which has 4 branches of government, and then our districts are broken down by voting districts, which this map represents. So this is talking about the 18 to 59-year-old population, which we have 5,000 people worldwide. But overall, with our youth and elders and elite elders, we have almost 8,000 people across the globe, half of which are residing in Wisconsin. So we have 4 branches of government. We have a fourth branch of government, right? That's the general council. So they convene once a year and make policy. And so in 2016, there was, it might have even been 2015, there was action taken at the general council wanting to create, for the Ho-Chunk Nation to create a Department of Agriculture. So in 2016, the legislature created an Establishment Act creating the Department of Agriculture that then operated as a division under the natural resources. So a year ago, we were actually funded as a full department with 2 staff positions, and then 3. So we just completed our first year of operation. We are now in the second year of operation. We have 6 positions, so we're growing. Under the Establishment Act, it talks about the vision for the department. So I've, just the things that stick out to me are healthy, traditional, and reassertion. And what that means to me is health, tradition, and sovereignty. And so that's what we work on today. So in modernity, tribes, particularly us, the Ho-Chunk Nation, are reasserting control. We have land management and food laws, codes, ordinances, and policy. And, laws, codes, and ordinances are created under the legislature. Policy is created under executive branch and the general council. We are reacquiring our lands in our traditional territory. We are doing food production. Our government and our people are reaffirming our traditional practices and revitalizing our traditional practices. Some of this was never lost. Some families always maintained a lot of this information, and some families were completely severed from this. And during these different eras, some of our families were severed by the boarding school era, or by just the state and local governments coming in and removing children arbitrarily. And so now we have a law, federal law, the Indian Child Welfare Act, to prevent that, so that people can maintain these ties or regain these ties to our traditional practices and foodways. So because I'm ag, I always talk about our foodways. And so we still have people hunting, trapping, fishing, foraging, tapping maple trees, and other trees as well. We still have ceremonies today. We're still using some old and modern land management practices. Using fire is a big one that we'll utilize if our DNR uses it more. We are doing food production. We're recruiting people to be employees within the ag department, but also to be volunteers, and then to be part of some of our other programming. So I'm just going to I'm going to jump around now because I have pictures and I have a few things I want to talk about in the last few minutes here. This Indian corn I talked about, this is a Ho-Chunk variety. This is the one that was on the very first slide I wanted you to take a look at. This is a blue and white corn. It's Ho-Chunk speckled corn. And to me, that's just stunning. That is just one of the most beautiful corns. That's just one of the varieties that we have. We have a blue speckled corn that's has much more blue in it. Blue is more prominent. We have a red corn, Bronze Beauty, and that one was actually grown for many generations around the Wittenberg area. And then they gifted that back to the Ho-Chunk Nation maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And so that's one that we are growing out as well. So some of these varieties still remain, and there's other varieties out there as well. And I think we had 4 varieties planted out this year. So what we have coming up in 2025, we're going to kick off a farmer cohort training. And, farmer, I guess I should probably use the word agriculturalist, because, for farmers, we're using it very loosely. It could be the person who's a hunter, a gatherer, conventional farmer, a backyard gardener, a tree tapper, or somebody who aspires to be. So they haven't even started it yet, right? So we're terming all of them farmers or agriculturalists. That program will be kicking off in 2025. We'll be teaching soil health, plant health, pest management, nutrient management. The intent is to reduce barriers to access. So some of the things that are historically a struggle for people of color, for brown people, are access to land, capital, equipment, technical assistance, training. So those are all the things that we'll be addressing within that farmer training program. The Ho-Chunk Nation has 1,800 acres of agricultural lands. We have many more acres than that, but specifically 1,800 acres that have been in ag leases in conventional farming practices. So we have more acres that could be utilized for other types of agricultural practices. So we'll be using this farmer training program, this cohort, multiple cohorts, to get people more involved or to support the people that are already doing some of these practices. And the goal of that, another goal, of that training program is also to reduce the phosphorus and nitrogen runoff into the watershed. We are working with NRCS. We have a contract with the NRCS for 3 high tunnels that are 100 feet long. I think they're 30 by 96 feet. So we'll have 3 of those that we'll be utilizing in the spring. And those will be housed at our Toma site, our Whirling Thunder Ranch Training Farm in Toma, just outside of Toma. We're working on product development. This year, we grew 10 acres of a high oil content sunflower seed. So we'll be looking at creating powder that could be ground to any consistency for flour, and oil, a cold press oil. And then we also have 1,400 pounds of a corn from last year. It's not a Ho-Chunk variety, but it's another variety. It's a rainbow flint. Sorry, they're mowing outside, so if it's loud, just going by periodically. So I apologize for that. But we do have 1,400 acres or 1,400 pounds of a corn that we're going to try to get into the tribal elder food box in the spring. And we're looking at turning that into hominy, a traditional hominy, utilizing traditional methods, which traditionally we would use a specific type of an ash, a tree ash, to have the lye seep into that and create a hominy. We don't have any products in the tribal elder food box as of yet, but that is something that we are actively working on and hope to have soon. And then we're just working on a lot of other things: capacity building, training, staff training, strategic planning. We do have a number of partnerships out there. I sit on a couple of the boards. So I'm the Ho-Chunk legislative delegate for WITCAC, which is Wisconsin Tribal Conservation and Ag Council. I believe I said that right. I am the Ho-Chunk presidential delegate to GLFC, which is Great Lakes Intertribal Food Coalition. And then we work with RPI and SASCAP through the University of Wisconsin-Madison. The RPI is the Rural Partnership Initiative, and SASCAP, I don't even remember what SASCAP stands for, but it's a $10 million grant that some people may have heard of that was awarded to the University of Wisconsin-Madison and Menominee Nation to provide services to tribes, or to help bolster foodways within Wisconsin Indian country. And Ho-Chunk Nation is a big partner on that one. And we have a number of other resources. So, I don't have them all listed. There's just too many to list, but these are some of our main ones here. When I say the UW, I'm speaking broadly. We're talking about CALS, we're talking about UW Extension, we're talking, the law center, what have you. The Tribal Elder Food Box program, I wish I had slides on here. I should have put slides on here, but that we all recall from the pandemic. Indian country knew there were fractures in the food system. America knew there were fractures in the food system, right? But we were able to just sort of be okay with existing, it'll be fine. But the pandemic really blew that wide open, right? Those fractures, were shattered wide open during the pandemic. When we've seen food shortages, we've seen processing facilities having to shut down. We've seen animals just having to be slaughtered, but not have a place to be turned into food, not having a place to be processed. And so out of that, the federal government made food boxes available all over the country. Remember seeing lines and lines of cars lining up to receive boxes of food. And it was wonderful, greatly appreciated, but they weren't always culturally important to tribal people, or they weren't digestible. You know, there were foods that mainstream society eats that tribal people and Ho-Chunk people have a difficult time digesting. Dairy is one of those. And so, you know, some of those food boxes, and I was one that was out there every Friday, you know, working with our groups that were, you know, loading cars, and we do that for hours and hours every Friday. And so people were getting 4, 5, 6, 8 gallons of milk that our bodies may not be able to digest, 2 gallons of yogurt, things like that. Other types of foods that maybe might be unfamiliar or just culturally irrelevant. And so out of that, a group of people designed the Tribal Elder Food Box Program. And the group of people created the Great Lakes Intertribal Food Coalition, and then collaborated with Feeding America Eastern Wisconsin, and I'm remiss to mention the other ones. I just don't recall them at the time, but there were like 3 partnerships there that took care of the logistics, the aggregation and distribution of that food that was culturally significant. So in year 1, there were, I believe, 3 tribes, northern tribes, that were able to, you know, put this together, collaborate on this, and then distribute these tribal elder food boxes in their locations. And they had food like whitefish from the Red Cliff tribe, maple syrup, maple sugar, and which is different than your white sugar, right? So it's not only culturally appropriate, but there's actually some nutrient value to it, you know, in moderation. And a lot of other foods in there that were either culturally significant or digestible and usable, familiar. And many of these foods were produced by local farmers, BIPOC farmers, organic farmers, regenerative farmers. Some of them were produced by tribal producers. And then there's year 2 and year 3, where that Tribal Elder Food Box Program extended to all 11 tribes in Wisconsin this last year. We're almost done with this year. So not only do we have all 11 tribes in Wisconsin participating and benefiting from this, but also additional drop sites as well in urban communities like Milwaukee. And so with that growth and expansion, there's a heavy emphasis on trying to support tribal producers to get more tribal producers putting their product into these boxes, thereby creating not only a healthy box for elders, but also creating a streamlined access to markets, competitive pricing, you know, so creating economy and revenue. So there's a lot happening. The partnership with UW-Madison, there's a lot of resource exchange there. Some of the pictures I'm going to run through here. Some of these pictures are, so this one here, this is our community members and a lot of our university partners out here doing our first planting, no, our second planting. I think we did our first planting day in May in Sauk County. We had 2 grow sites this year. And then this is our second day, day 2 in Monroe County. And a lot of these people are from UW-Madison. Those 10 acres of sunflowers that we grew this year, the high oil content sunflower seed, they were shorter seed, but they're high oil content. Beautiful, beautiful field out there in Sauk County. This is some of our elders out there. And if anybody remembers that television show, Hee Haw, that variety show, Hee Haw, where you have the people behind the bales of hay popping up, that's what these ladies were doing. They were squatting down and jumping up behind the sunflowers. It was really, really fun to be out there with these elders. Amazing ladies. And this is our staff with some of our UW partners. And I think this was our first harvest, or one of our very first harvests this year at the Sauk County site. So this is pretty cool that they took the time to take that picture. On the left, we have 2 of our staff that were with us all summer. And then on the right, we have the staff. And then the gentleman, if anybody knows some of the students at University of Madison. We have Paul, he's a grad student in ag engineering. And so he's doing work with the Ho-Chunk Nation on some ag engineering items. So we'll be working to develop items that will benefit the Ho-Chunk Nation in our ag efforts, but then that will also be his master's project as well. Just some more harvesting. So they were harvesting in Monroe and Sauk, but learning like the process to clean it so that, you know, we can use it for other items. So if for this year, we just gave all of our stuff away at different locations. But next year we'll be piloting a CSA program. So we're going to move all our vegetable production to one site so we can just kind of harness more of our energy in one location to increase our vegetable production, to get them into, we're going to do a 30 share CSA pilot, and then try to get, again, more growth out of that to get something, and I don't know what that is, into the tribal elder food box. So we had already talked about our product development with the sunflowers and value-added product, you know, with the corn and tahominy, but we're hoping to be able to get some produce into the tribal elder food box next year. So that remains to be seen. So they were just kind of learning these processes on, you know, when you take them out, you know, clean it this way. Whereas, you know, if you're at home, you just pick it and rinse it and whatever. You know, you can pick your tomatoes off the ground if they fall over, you can take them home and still eat them, you know, but just kind of learning some of the nuances when we're using food that will go elsewhere. So on the left, we have a volunteer. So we had volunteer days every week as well. So volunteer Wednesday and volunteer Friday. So at the two different locations. So the two different locations would draw from the different tribal communities there. So this one on the left is my daughter. She was out there helping the staff. So that was really, really fun to watch, to see families come together like that. If anybody knows Rue, I didn't get her permission to use this picture, but my staff and I went to Rue's research location where they're doing tomato research, and we got to eat the different tomatoes. And I didn't realize there was so many. I mean, I knew it, but I didn't quite realize it at the same time. There's so much flavor difference between the different tomatoes, even when they look alike. So we got to eat some of the tomatoes that they were doing research on. It was really awesome. During the first year of the pandemic, these are 3 elders out here. They just, you know, the fracture in the food system, boom, tilled up a field and grew. I don't remember what variety of Indian corn it was. I don't think it was a Ho-Chunk variety, but then they had a bunch of squash, melons, beans, potatoes. Those 3 people, one of them is 80 now. So they were all in their late 70s, mid and late 70s. And they just grew a garden. I mean, that lady's on the left is in her scooter with a stick hoeing. I mean, what the heck? If that just doesn't speak volumes, I don't know what does. That just it's one of my favorite pictures. So that's about everything. I didn't cover everything, but that's everything I have on slides.
Thank you so much, Hinu, for taking us through quite a journey from pre-contact to looking at federal Indian policy and all the different eras and how that specifically affected the Ho-Chunk Nation, to the amazing work that you all are doing now, and the department that you lead, and everything that's coming there. Just so appreciate your time sharing that with all of us. I also just want to acknowledge it's 12:55, so we're going to officially end the webinar at 1. So just for folks who need to hop off, I want you to feel free to hop off at 1. But we have a number of questions in the chat. If you have additional questions, now is a great time to get them in the chat, and we'll take some time to try to answer the ones that we can. Also want to real quick say we'll put a link in the chat here, but this is one of 2 webinars that the Wisconsin Women in Conservation Program is doing for Native American Heritage Month. We have another coming up later this month that is all about seed rematriation with an incredible seed saver with the Ho-Chunk Nation. that we don't want you all to miss. If you're able to attend that, that'll be with Jessica Green here on the 21st of November. So just wanted to plug that as well. And with that, I'm going to go to our first question. Okay, the first one: in the future, are you looking to help reevaluate Western farming practices and move them towards something more sustainable, like something we would have found pre-contact?
Yeah, there's a lot of different efforts, and it can't all rest with our small department. So that's why we wanted to incorporate volunteer days twice a week during the grow season, different community events, and then our farmer cohort program. We want to be able to reach different people and not just train people to become producers or practice, subsistence farming, but also we want to be learners as well, not just teachers, but there's a lot that we can learn from our community as well. There's a lot of people that are out there doing things. And so we want to be able to support people where they're at, and then also run different pilots, right? So we had a pilot project, our vegetable pilot program. I don't have the outputs tallied up yet, but we also took weights on everything that we pulled out of the garden. But we also had cover crop demonstrations, and then moving forward, we want to look at other demonstrations like bringing fire back into the garden. What does that look like? We know our DNR department is using it when they're doing the land management practices and prairie restoration, stuff like that. But we want to bring some of that action into the garden and see what that looks like. We want to be able to, bring in raised beds and do some demonstration trials with the raised beds and kind of look at the difference in production and how that plays out. So, yes, we'll do an infusion of practices.
That's great. Thank you so much. The second question we had was, how are you all protecting your corn from cross-pollination with potential other corn varieties out at your farm?
We are and we aren't. So ultimately, we're in the Corn Belt. That's going to be a problem. And so our corn is just simply going to cross. And so we have to be aware of that. And so if we're growing corn for consumption, then we can be less active in protecting that corn. But if we're growing corn for seed production, and we want to keep that pure, then we have to do hand pollination. And so my staff didn't do hand pollination this year, but we did have some of our corn being grown out at different sites where that hand pollination was happening. So we still have that pure seed. So that's a problem.
Yeah. Definitely.
We're working on it. It's on our radar. And we're being careful with that.
Definitely. I want to acknowledge it's 1. So for folks that need to hop off, feel free to. We're going to stay on for 10 or 15 more minutes and answer the questions that we can get to. Also, just want to say we're going to put some links in the chat about some additional upcoming WEWIC events and information if you want to join the listserv to stay up to date on upcoming events and programming in your area. And with that, I'm going to go straight to our next question. So I guess these two are kind of related. So the first is your training open to other tribes? And then the second is, I guess, kind of like a follow-up to that question to see if it's open to folks that are not part of a federally recognized tribe.
So right now, because that program is grant funded, and it's a 3-year grant. The first year is a development phase, so we're going to have 2 years of cohort. And it is focused in the Mississippi watershed. So by virtue of the grant jurisdiction, being the Mississippi watershed, it's not even inclusive of all of my tribal communities. It's not even inclusive of all my Ho-Chunk communities. So we're looking at some workarounds for that, and there's workarounds. But because the funding is limited and short term, we're not able to just necessarily open it up to everybody. But I do absolutely want to have it available to tribal people in Ho-Chunk communities. And depending on enrollment, we can consider a wider enrollment, but it is going to be for tribal people. First and foremost, Ho-Chunk community members, right? So if they're non-tribal or non-Ho-Chunk in our Ho-Chunk community, they're married to a Ho-Chunk, they have Ho-Chunk kids, by all means, we want to support that. But a little bit of it remains to be seen. If we have, 200 people enrolling and I only have 25 spots, then we have to focus on the watershed, the Ho-Chunk community. So I don't want to exclude other tribal people that are, married to our Ho-Chunk tribal members or raising our Ho-Chunk children. So yes and no. Stay tuned.
Yeah.
I do have some flexibility though.
Yeah. And the joys of grants. But that's really helpful. Thank you so much for breaking that down for us. The next question is that somebody said they recently joined a local organic meat CSA. They're not quite an elder yet, but they'd be interested in the food box program and are wondering if that is an option for tribal members, or is that a consideration for the future?
So I'm sorry, is the question, I need to understand the question a little bit more.
Yes, I'm trying to go back up really quick and make sure I can see if whoever asked that question could unmute or going back to try to find it in the chat.
And until
Angie Lowe, it looks like.
Okay, while they're unmuting, I'll just say the Tribal Elder Food Box Program, it's operating in Wisconsin. Oh, they don't have a mic. So it's available to tribal elders. But not all tribal elders live in the community where the disbursements are happening. So there's some limitation to that. It's not like it can be mailed out to Chicago. But it's a logistical undertaking. Just wondering if that can be an option for the future, if what specifically can be an option for the future, if you can write that, Angie. But, for Ho-Chunk, I think we have like 6 drop sites. And so everything stops, and then our internal people, when that's distributed to the Ho-Chunk Nation, it's brought to the Ho-Chunk, and then it has to be redistributed by our staff, not mine specifically, but our Ho-Chunk Nation staff will then redistribute it to various sites. I mean, we've got Toma, Black River, La Crosse, Wisconsin Dells, Nakusa, Wittenberg, like it's a lot. The other tribes, because they're centralized, the Ho-Chunk Nation is not centralized, we're spread out. But other tribes that are centralized, they're able to benefit from that twice a month, whereas for us, it's a logistical, huge undertaking. So we get it once a month. But if I don't know if that answers Angie's question, but it has expanded not only to all tribes, but in Milwaukee, there's 2 additional drop sites in Milwaukee, the SIATS, which is the Oneida Nation office, and then the Ho-Chunk Nation branch office. Is it? No. I don't remember if it's at the branch office or if it's at the, there's an IHS clinic over there as well. But, we're always looking at expanding, but there's always a cost to everything. So,
It looks like,
go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, it looks like maybe the question was for folks that aren't elders in the community. Are there other ways to have access to CSA or other options for meat and vegetable sourcing?
So for the Tribal Elder Food Box specifically, that's just for elders, but we are in discussions on how can we expand that, and there's a cost to everything. I mean, each box costs about $70. Each drop is about 2,000 boxes. And it's all grant funded. This year, because it's such an impactful program, the governor put the Tribal Elder Food Box in his budget. That's amazing. And I think that's a 2-year cycle. And I don't remember, it might be like 1.3 million, something like that. So if somebody out here knows, you can go ahead and put it in the chat. But that's a substantial funding source, but it's also a substantial lift for each of these boxes to get them out to these communities. So to expand it, we would love to be able to expand it beyond elders, but there's such a cost to it. There's such a logistics to carry it out. So the food hub will go out across the state and pick up all these food items from Red Cliff over to Hudson, all over, and then they bring it back to the food hub, repack it, redistribute it back out again, and that's very expensive. And so we even have our tribal people asking, how can we get that? When is there just going to be a tribal food box? And I don't know when, but don't think that we're not having that conversation. We are, but we have to have the capacity to do that. 1.5. Thank you, Esther. So with that in mind, there's discussions about, how can there be a prescription box? Can there be a prescription food box that Medicaid will pay for? There isn't right now, but these are discussions that are happening. There's discussions about a baby box, a box for nursing mothers, a box for expectant mothers. There's a cost to that, and there's a lot of dialogue happening. So stay tuned, but it will definitely take time.
Thank you, Hinu, for talking through that really incredible new program and possibilities for future ones. And we're excited to stay tuned and hear more. The next question is from Lily. Indigenous agriculturalists have always been breeding and improving plants, as you said. Do you know of any Ho-Chunk plant improvement projects going on right now?
Yes, no. So no, not specifically, but that's on our radar as a Department of Agriculture. So when we're talking about demonstration projects, or research projects, I'm a little hesitant to use the word research because I don't want, sometimes there's been a difficult relationship with institutions and tribes and extractive behavior and extracting data and ownership and stuff. So I want to be careful when I'm using the word research, but I'm going to say research. We can do our own research, and it might look different than what, the scientific research looks like, but I would call it tribal ecological knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge in the modern sense. And so that is something that we'll be looking at for next year's growth cycle and putting together some tribal, I'm going to say tribal research, but it's just innovative solutions. My staff gave me the term innovative solutions on how to do these improvements within a culturally appropriate setting. So yeah, we want to be doing that. We didn't do that this year. We just did more demonstration projects with cover crops so that we could educate the people on, how can you amend the soil? What are you looking for? What do different crops do? But we want to take it a little bit more intensive in the years to come.
Thank you. I'm going to combine two questions into this next one that I think are related. So one was, how do we help progress this movement over the next 4 years? I'm thinking like more broadly, but then specifically, folks are interested, do you all still offer volunteer days, or how are ways that we could get involved to help those efforts?
Yeah, so progressing what? The tribal elder food box, indigenous agriculture, yes,
great question.
yes.
Rachel, if you have more thoughts on specifics, would love to hear that. But I'm thinking broadly, and I think it was during the food sovereignty slide that this question popped up. So I think broadly indigenous food sovereignty.
Right. So with food sovereignty, each tribe may have their own definition, but we're absolutely looking at progressing all of this, right? So food sovereignty movement, Ho-Chunk agriculture, traditional agriculture, modern infusion, practices and information into our agriculture, tribal elder food box. Yes, we want to advance all of this. And how can people get involved with that? We'll be doing volunteer days next growth cycle again. We do have a Facebook page. I think it's called Ho-Chunk Ag, HO-CHUNK Ag. Or maybe it's Ho-Chunk Agriculture, but we're trying to hashtag Ho-Chunk Ag. So we'll be posting next year for our volunteer days, and we want to encourage engagement in our tribal communities, but also we want to be good neighbors and have other people come in and volunteer. We had a lot of volunteers from the university, but also the community. There's opportunities to volunteer, but also with our farmer training program, even though that's grant funded, what my goal with that is to make it replicable and free or low cost, right? So any tribe or community could actually pick up the model that we'll be developing, pick it up and replicate it. So what does that mean then? It means we need to have instructors that we can bring on at low or no cost. So who knows a lot, right? You all here know a lot. The NRCS, you know, the extension office, the university, our own community members. So we want to be able to pull in these people to be instructors and then also utilize our staff as well, to be some of that instructor, fulfill that instructor component. So we want it to be replicable. And so ways to help could be, you know, what is your expertise? And I'm just going to say this, and I don't want to offend anyone, but we're looking for instructors through these various resources, but we want people that are culturally competent. And if you're not sure what that means, ask me. If you feel you are, great. If you feel like you're not, we can work with that, right? But we don't want to just bring on people that might have a different teaching tactic. We want to bring on people that can teach and learn. That can be teachers and students that can help. So there may be capacity to even assist within our farmer training program, on a volunteer basis or a small, you know, honorarium or something like that. But yeah, we will also be having the volunteer days as well next year.
Thank you. We only have a couple more minutes left, so I think we're only going to get to one more question and then we're going to wrap it up. But thank you for those who have stayed on. It's been a really interesting Q&A to learn a lot more. So I guess I will follow up. Oh, there's a couple. I'm having a hard time picking between them. I guess maybe to go back to the beginning of history, somebody was wondering if you have any more information or are familiar with the history of raised garden beds in Sauk County, and I'm wondering if that's maybe the long-term history of like pre-contact raised beds, if that's a thing, or if not, if you have additional information or thoughts.
Not a lot. Those pre-contact raised beds in Sauk, they're all over Wisconsin. And I just try to imagine what they must have looked like in real life. There's LiDAR scans. So LiDAR is a specific type of photography, for lack of a better word, that can like scan the ground and look beyond. It can look through the trees and debris and identify old activity in the ground. So those LiDAR scans can identify that. I will be delving in deeper into that research myself. So I don't have a lot of that, but I would love to be able to replicate that in some of our demonstration fields.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll stay tuned with that and a lot of the other things coming out.
There's a lot of information out there though, and I don't remember his name, but there was a gentleman from the university that did author a book on it.
Great.
There are people that do have some of that info.
Great. Well, with that, I'm gonna have us wrap it up. Thank you again, Hinu, for coming and sharing so much of your experience and knowledge and information about the history of the Ho-Chunk Nation and the current efforts around the Department of Agriculture. We're really grateful for that. And as a reminder, folks, this is one of 2 webinars we have in honor of Native American Heritage Month. So please do join us for that second webinar later this month. With that, have a great Thursday, everyone, and we look forward to connecting with you all in other ways in the coming days and weeks.